to the community here in Ridgefield again, because it feels like the Ridgefield Library has sort of tracked my interests and career as a new farmer in the state over the last 15 years. So I'm thrilled to be here. My life has changed a little bit in the last 2 years, from being a full-time farmer here at the Hickories to also now running the Northeast Organic Farming Association of Connecticut. And Connecticut NOFA was really how I got my start farming. It's our industries sort of industries group for training, for farmer advocacy, fostering the organic movement writ large in this state and across the region of the Northeast. So it feels really good in the last couple of years to be able to give back to the larger community and also help to direct some of the future of farming and organic farming in particular throughout the region. There has been so much interesting work, and so much for me has been a really exciting journey. I've learned a ton. NOFA has been around for 40 years. If I can just introduce you to the organization, it's been around for 40 years in Connecticut, and next year is the 50th year across the Northeast: Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Jersey. Every state has its own way of supporting its small organic farmers. And in Connecticut, the organization was founded by this gentleman here on the left, Bill Dusing, who has been an extraordinary teacher of mine, and certainly was there throughout some of the rockiest first years of my farming life. And he always had, if I can advance this, a lot of different training opportunities. NOFA offers the Winter Conference, which is a conference on organic agriculture every year. This coming year it will be virtual and in March, but it's for farming, gardening, and advocacy, organic, all things organic. And I also took part in the Beginning Women Farmers program. I was involved in the Journey Person, a mentorship program. They have landscaper training, and throughout all of this, throughout my entire history with this organization, as much as I was learning and as much as I am devoted to organics in agriculture, I have struggled always against what seems like a problem that is just getting worse. I went into farming to try to address some of my concerns about the changing climate and my concerns about the food system. And though, at the risk of sounding, of starting on a depressing note, it's been a tough 15 years. I don't know how many inroads we are really making. I'm concerned about the future of the planet even more than I was 15 years ago, maybe, with the more I've learned. And I often use this analogy. In the last couple of years, I started a family, and so I ended up playing this game. I don't know how many of you have seen this game, Jenga, but before I was a farmer, I was an English teacher, and so I've always really liked big words. And so I share with you tonight, by way of sort of setting the scene of the Ecotype project work that is now currently my passion with NOFA and with our farm here. This word, the Anthropocene, describes our current geological age. The definition is here at the top. It is viewed as the period during which human activity has been the dominant influence on climate and the environment. What that means is, and I use this analogy of Jenga to describe it, because nature, in its billions of years it has had to set itself up, has created relationships and fostered an interdependence among all things that is very much like that balance of a Jenga puzzle. And it feels like in this Anthropocene, we have started to play Jenga with that beautiful system, with that perfect system. Human beings have started extracting fossil fuels and therefore weakened that tower. We have started extracting or eliminating habitat, and developing, beautiful, pristine places. And every time we do that, every time our impact is felt on the planet, it is removing another peg of stability in the system. And so against that very large and seemingly overwhelming backdrop, I'm a farmer and I grow food and I grow plants. And sometimes that work is very difficult. And when I was starting out, the Connecticut's founder, Bill Dusing, used to tell me, Dina, whenever you get overwhelmed by the enormity of the task at hand in running a small organic farm and starting a small farm, put down your shovels and put down your hose and take a walk in the woods. And so much of what we are doing as organic farmers is mimicking the systems that we see in the wilderness. And part of what we want to talk to you tonight, part of what we want to talk about with you tonight, is how essential that piece of advice is. That what makes organic farming extraordinary and what makes it so often a solution to what we see as a climate in crisis or a planet in crisis or even a community in crisis is that we are mimicking natural systems and we are inviting in the wilderness back to our agricultural land. There are some pretty extraordinary statistics about that, and I wanted to start now diving into the work of the Ecotype project by talking to you a little bit about the Connecticut Forest. Not only is it an extraordinary system because it, with only one amendment to the soil every year, it supports so much life. The carbon that is sequestered in the trees and the soil supports insect life, above seen and unseen, from the bugs to the squirrels to the deer. All of that life is maintained with one amendment or one addition every year, which is simply 3 or 4 inches of deciduous leaves that fall on the forest floor. And that cycle is enough to support all of the oaks, all of the hickories, all of the wildlife. And the system, as Sefra will talk to you about later, is so complex. And this amazing statistic is brought to us by Doug Ptolemy's research, that a single white oak can support over 280 different species of insect. So when I think about how you feed things, how you feed people as a farmer, there is a lesson to be learned in the forest about how food systems work and support each other. And in specific, as we see the world changing, we recognize that the forests play an essential role in the girding of our community and our planet for a climate that is changing. Farmland and food systems play an important role. And NOFA has been there all along talking about how important it is to bring the wilderness back into our farms and into our gardens. But as I say, in this Anthropocene, I am constantly running up against this problem of how much of our land has been developed and how important it is to cast a wider net, not just to farmers, but in looking at the map of development in our state, there is so much land that is not farming, that is not being actively farmed by farmers like me or the farmers you see in this picture, but that we need that land working as well to support the ecosystems that we see supported in the forest. We need that land supporting our human ecosystems as well. And so NOFA's mission initially has been to support farmers and farmland and advocate for organic food and agriculture. But our mission is changing and our work is changing to broaden the definition of working land. And that's really why we're here to talk to you tonight, is that we now undertake resilience in all land. That is not just row crops, but soccer fields, your backyard, your lawn, the rain gardens, urban rooftop farms, the highway medians, whatever it is, if we are going to attack what we see as a degradation of our ecosystem, if we're going to fix this mess, we need all boats rowing together in the same direction. And that means your backyard, it means the medians on the highway, just as much as it now means my farm. So with that kind of call to action, I took over the executive director position at NOFA and set to work to educate myself about some of the current trends in agriculture. And that ran me into, if I can get this slide to go forward, so many different stakeholders who are involved in this, whether it's the scientific community, farmers, et cetera. But the one thing that really has, I think, rocked my world or really been so exciting for me has been to learn about the work of the Pollinator Pathway. Many of you guys probably know about their work because Ridgefield is a important step or important path along this corridor. And so I won't spend too much time describing it, albeit to say that the reason that this group exists is because of a central problem that we have seen or that we have started to document as a planet, which is the loss of insect abundance. So that's what brings us together tonight, is that over the course of my lifetime, and I'm 44, so over the course of the last 44 years, the planet is estimated to have lost 75% of its insect abundance. If you weighed all the insects on the planet, that bag is now 75% lighter than it ever was when I was a child. And that's a big problem because as many of us recognized, insects, or as Doug Ptolemy coined the phrase, they are the little things upon which all life depends. They are, no joke, paying my salary because every day they produce on my farm the fruits, the vegetables, everything it is on my farm that I sell is made possible because at some point an insect visited a blossom. And so I recognized very quickly in the future of farming that the work of the Pollinator Pathway was going to be central to what we are doing as farmers. If we don't lock arms very quickly with the conservation folks out there and the residential folks who are changing the landscape, they are doing that to support our food system, as well as all of the other ecosystem services around. I will quickly review just the work of the Pollinator Pathway, and then once we sort of describe it, I'll talk a little bit about Connecticut NOFA's response, because I think a lot of different organizations are now engaged with this work on insect abundance, but we'll talk to you about what we in specific are doing. The Pollinator Pathway asks you to rethink your lawn, to plant native plants, to avoid pesticides. And all of that is to try to connect up habitats for insects to thrive. So this slide, which I've taken from one of their presentations, has to do with the fact that so much of Connecticut is fragmented habitat, meaning we have little parcels of open space that exist in little parcels of parks and wilderness, but most of them are divided by residential communities. We are an incredibly developed state. And so if you put your bug eyes on and imagine trying to move from one habitat to another, trying to move to find not only things to eat, but places to nest or places to raise your young, it is very hard to get through Connecticut because there are so many what we would call sort of ecological wastelands of either backyards where there is nothing to eat because they're all just in grass, or farms that are spraying pesticides that make them dangerous, highways that bifurcate or that bisect the landscape. And so all of this fragmentation in our landscape has meant the loss of habitat. And that has led to a loss of insects. And that threatens the future of our farms. So I've joined in with this Pollinator Pathway. They are the most incredible group. If you're not, following them or a member or working with them, please do. I urge you to get to know some of the incredible folks who are doing this work. But it's a long way of saying, as we look at our state and look at this maps the prime agricultural soils. The white is the suburban or developed landscapes. The gray is the urban areas. We can't possibly expect the little pieces of wilderness that are left to do the work to protect all of us and our food system. So that means we need everybody to engage, and we need farmers to engage. We need to restore the habitats throughout our state in order to support these insects and support ourselves. So this map was always very striking to me, only because, again, as Sefra will say later on, when you put your bug eyes on, it would be pretty hard to survive in this state if you were an insect moving from Stamford to Hartford. There's just not enough places to stop. So in this Pollinator Pathway conversation, we have tried to get folks to plant native plants. And that's really where, for me, my ears pricked up as a farmer. And I said, well, I may not know about, the Latin names of this native plant and that native plant, but I do know how to grow stuff. And so if we need plants in order to restore habitat, I can help with that. And it turns out, of course, that in returning to my original thought in talking to you tonight, when you are trying to mimic natural cycles by planting native plants back in our region, it's not as simple as just running out to Home Depot and grabbing the new Pollinator series that they have put on the shelves. It's much more complicated than that. Restoring habitat means finding the right plants, the plants that were intended to be here from the beginning, the plants that have evolved with our landscape, and returning them to our habitats around us. So much of the conversation around pollinator gardens, so much of the conversation around connecting up or rewilding our state has not included farmland. And yet farmers and our food system is one of the primary beneficiaries of insect abundance. So Connecticut NOFA stepped in to say, hey, what about the farmland? And how can we include agriculture, and how can agriculture be a better partner with the conservation work that's happening around our state in terms of native plants? So we hatched the Ecotype project, and Sefra will describe to you in all kinds of detail what that really means in specific. But suffice it to say at the opening of this talk that the impetus is really about building that stronger bridge between wilderness and agriculture. That so often farmers are seen as the perpetrators of environmental degradation instead of the solution. And I believe farmers can be the solution to what ails our climate. And in particular around this issue, farmland can be the solution for how we begin to return to a place of insect abundance. And when insects thrive, obviously we all do, the birds who depend on them, people, etc. So I will pass it over to Sefra, because the nuts and bolts of this project, what an ecotype is, what plants are going where, all of that is really where the fun starts happening. But it was it's important for me at least to kind of lay the background out for you, that we are rewilding our agrarian land as a way of increasing their resilience for the next phase of whatever the climate will bring. So I will stop sharing my slides here. Sefra, why don't you start sharing yours, and you can tell us about your trip. Sefra is coming to us fresh from a pretty exciting trip, so she'll talk to us a little bit about that before we dive into the ecotype.
Thanks, Dina. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And I probably still look a little sun and windblown because I, this morning, just finished a 6-day canoe paddle called the Botanical Expedition. Instead of lead botanist, I'm lead botanist. And exactly what Dina was talking about, understanding the interplay between these natural pathways and corridors and how farmland and wilderness play alongside each other. I took 500 of these ecotype plants with us and paddled 87 miles with 10 other intrepid botanical explorers. And we really went as citizen scientists as on an expedition to see, what do these ecological corridors really look like? What's growing there? How close are the farms? What does everything look like? And what we found was fascinating. We really saw that there, and I'll speak much more about the species and the plants that we have, but just to give you an idea, we carried 11 different species of native plants with us. And I was really encouraged to see that there were different way stations along this natural river. We were on the Connecticut River, the long tidal river, which actually starts up in the headwaters right on the Canadian border in Maine and goes all the way to Long Island Sound. So when we think about, from time immemorial, what the corridors were that insects use, that animals use, and that humans have used for transport, these riparian areas, these river areas, are so important. In terms of seed, there are a lot of different ways that seeds are dispersed. I, like Dina, am a big fan of big fun words, and so some of those words are hydrockery, the dispersal of seed by water, or anemochory, the dispersal of seed by wind, or anthropocary, the dispersal of seed by humans. And what we were doing on this expedition was taking these plants and putting these native plants back in the right place where they belong, so that when they go to seed through all those different natural dispersal mechanisms, we're re-imbuing those wild lands and their living seed bank, which is in their soil and their living seed profile, the seeds that need to be there. Because just like as we were paddling and camping along the river, and as Dina showed in the fragmented landscape, our pollinators need those same things. They need habitat and food and resting sites all along this riparian corridor as well. And back on Dina's map that she was sharing, you can see that the alluvial soils along this riverbank are really some of our richest farmland that we have. And so it was very interesting to see, as the Ecotype project functions under a USDA specialty crop block grant, and our specialty crop is the seeds. And so when we think about that, and we think about what farmers do and the production of their crops, it becomes very interesting to see that on these edge sites where these insects and pollinators are flowing down this ecosystem, this river ecosystem, and then we see the farmlands right on the side of the riverbank, to encourage putting in these habitats in these founder plots, which I'll show and explain to you, would be such an inviting way to have the interplay of the wilderness come onto the farm and be able to help pollinate, so that we have local food and food security and seed sovereignty and all of these things that Dina speaks to. So this project has really been exciting because we were bringing all of these different strategic partners to the table. So before I go through and explain more about the Ecotype project, I just want to share one quick drone shot from this expedition. And we can see here. So this was just 2 days ago. We're paddling along the beautiful Connecticut River, and we had 500 native plants, and we worked with the caretakers of the different campsites to implement these pollinator plants as way stations along this pollinator pathway to fortify this beautiful ecological green corridor. It really is a beautiful river, and I encourage all of you to paddle it. Even on Labor Day weekend, it was rather empty and bald eagles flying everywhere, so just gorgeous. But back to the Ecotype project, And well, one last thing, the Wings World Quest is an expedition organization that supports supports women in science. So we were proud to carry their flag. And as an ethnobotanist, I also carry this flag with me on my work in the South Pacific, talking about the importance of seed banks and preserving genetic diversity in the faces of blights and pests and diseases. As I'll talk about later, it's really important to maintain these arcs of diversity of genetics, because that's what gives you your painter's tool brush to be able to adapt and overcome for whatever pests or diseases or climatic conditions may come about. So with all of that said, I would like to show you what an ecoregion is. So the reason why we planned the botanical expedition where we are paddling for the pollinators is we wanted to help promote the understanding that, as Dina said, when you put your bug eyes on, when bugs are flying over habitats and areas, they don't see the Massachusetts-Connecticut line. What they do see is, and if you can see here, are these mosaics of similar habitats and communities. And what this map represents, it was made by the EPA. There were many conservationists who said, we can't be so siloed. We can't have our soil scientists looking at one map and our forestry conservationists looking at another map. So what they did is they overlaid the different maps of hydrology and soil structures and forestry and just a general animal habitat communities. And with a broad kind of artistic stroke, they said, okay, if we go zoom in from our bioregions, if we look at ecoregions, what we can see is that the genetics along, let's say, ecoregion 59, which is where Ridgefield is, which is where we are. And if you can see this little nub here that goes up in the Connecticut River, that was where we paddled. And once we got into ecoregion 59 is where we started planting these gardens. What the environmentalists and the conservationists have said is the genetics that you can collect of plants along those areas can be spread within ecoregion 59, and you're putting the right plants in the right place. So with that framework, with the Ecotype project, we started to gather these strategic partners to see what does it look like to wild gather the seed of these right wild plants and get them into production to be available to the pollinator pathways and to the homeowners. So an ecotype is just the fancy word that says the genetics of these seeds were collected in this place. So these are truly local native seeds. So let's say there's a wild stand of a Joe Pye weed, and a botanist who knows how to observe that population, make sure that it's a large enough population for good genetic diversity, making sure that it's not a disturbed area, and making sure that they only collect the right amount and that you're not completely depleting these wild populations. So there's a lot of stewardship that goes into the collection process. They take these seeds and then we plant them on organic farms, which is what I'll show you. But when we think about it, those seeds are best adapted to that soil. So you think about the terroir, if you will, that those seeds are adapted to the climate, they're adapted to the pests. And just like we as farmers, we select our heirlooms for, oh, that tomato tastes best, or I like what that looks like. That's what our friends, the entomological pollinators, have been doing as well. They've been doing the stewardship and selection so that these plants have what they want. And for taste and for bloom times, if you think about it, there's a lot of pollinators that are migratory species. So if we were to buy even the same species of these native plants from the native nurseries that are in the Midwest, those plants, because of how much sun they get and their variations in temperatures and such, they'll bloom at different times, or perhaps they'll even bloom longer. So the example of, if the monarchs have the wrong type of milkweed here, they'll stay and keep feeding too long, and they'll miss their migration. And further on down the line, that has negative repercussions, that if they can't survive the colds, for example. So when we think about the right plants in the right place, it has to do with how they've evolved ecologically in our certain area. And again, what we want to do is preserve that wild genetics that we find out in our wild lands where we are. If we're bringing in seeds from other places, then those genetics are being pollinated in, and it kind of, it messes with their adaptation ability because it's bringing in genetics from other places. So that's what an ecotype is. And what we have done is created this pathway. So to actually, as I said before, wild seeds from the wild into the homeowner's backyard takes quite a few steps, which has been really exciting to help put together with CT NOFA and with Dina and with a bunch of other wonderful people. So we've predominantly been working with Jordy Elkins of Highstead Arboretum, who's been our main botanist seed collector. And what we do after we select for species that are very important for a wide arc and diversity of pollinators is we take that seed and we find organic farms to plant founder plots. Dina, her beautiful farm, the Hickories in your town of Ridgefield, has 14 founder plots now, 14 different species. And each of those founder plots has 200 plants. And I'll show you a gorgeous picture of the founder plot in just a bit. But from those 200 plants of each species, when it becomes the right time, because just like a tomato has its perfect ripeness, a seed has its perfect ripeness. And since our seed is our crop, I monitor it and watch it because seeds are green and then they mature and then they turn brown. They desiccate, they become hard. And I'll show you a picture. They get that pappus, that windblown part that disperses them through the landscape. I go in and collect the seed, clean it, which is a whole nother adventure, store it, and then what we do is we give them to the nurserymen. And then the nurserymen are able to take that wild collected seed and locally grow it out. So they're able to grow these truly local natives, and that's when they become available to you all, to the gardeners, to the landscapers. And as our project amps up with the amount of seed that we are yielding, we can start having the conversations around working with municipalities and departments of transportation who have huge swaths of land that will really help reduce the fragmentation, as Dina was showing you, between where these natural areas are. And the more we proliferate these out on the landscape, the more that the pollinators and the birds thrive, the more local food we have, and we all get to be stewards as citizen science and conservationists just by planting these beautiful plants. So, if this will load, let's see. Oh, I think we missed a slide. Okay, well, we'll skip that slide. And sorry about this. Okay, so as I said before, you can see some close-ups. There's New York ironweed in the center there. Seeds for me as the seed huntress, I've spent the past 10 years very dedicated to the conservation of seed. I find them to be these amazing magic embryos that in one little seed, you can plant one seed and it is able to grow thousands. It's just, the ROI of seed is remarkable. And we really get to be this great lineage between all of those who have caretaken, you know, whether it be the insects or whether it be the humans who have caretaken these seeds all before us, to be able to make sure that these seeds still exist in the living seed profile for all those that come after us. So as you can see some of the plants, what they look like when the seed is ready to harvest. So that's when I'll go in and I'll collect it and I put it in a brown paper bag, and don't put too much in because you want the airflow to help really make sure that they're very, very dry. And then, so you can see us collecting in the upper right-hand corner. And I think the picture that got skipped over was what the beautiful founders plots look like on Dina's farm. But in the bottom right corner, you can see what those rows look like once they've gone to seed. And really it's quite a bit of seed, and it doesn't all mature at the same time. So we go through, we collect, we go back through, we collect some more. And we got almost 500,000 seed off of one of these founder plots. So you can see in the bottom left-hand corner, the beginning processes of cleaning up. You rub it together so that that pappus, that the fluffy part that makes it fly, we rub that away to separate the actual seed from that, just to decrease the size. In nature, the pappus stays on, it falls to the ground, it sits in the ground, and it goes through the freeze and thaw of the fall and the winter, the moisture and the rain. So these native perennial pollinator plants have to go through that type of an environment for them to be able to germinate. So that's called stratification. So in an effort to mimic nature, when we harvest these seeds, we have to put them through a period of cold stratification to break them out of their basically hibernation to be able to germinate when we plant them in the spring or the fall. So it's a really fun process, and every species is different. And every species has its own little nuance of what the seed looks like, how to clean it, how to stratify it, how to germinate it. But we're making a very robust getting started toolkit, which really helps give a profile to each of these so that anyone who wants to can really get started and get them on their landscape. So you can see there a list of the species that we've begun with. Beautiful species. You can see some milkweeds and Joe Pied weeds and bone sets and bergamonts and just, you know, even though we call them native pollinator plants, I think a lot of times people think of these as like these shrubby, meadowy looking things, but really just the architecture and the bloom of them are just as exquisite as any other cultivated flowers that we, you know, either do for cut flowers or have in our yards. So we've worked predominantly a lot with Planter's Choice Nursery. You can see Daryl Newman down there, and of course the great Sal Gilberti up top. And Daryl's done a great job with helping to host these plant sales to be able to make them available to homeowners. So the Wilton High School plant sale just ended. They were the first ones actually last season, and they had a great success, and we were able to get a whole bunch of these ecotypes out into the landscape. And right now, actually, the Aspetuck Land Trust fall plant sale is currently on. So if you're inspired by this and want to put these plants in your landscape, now is a great time to plant. And it would be great if you wanted to join the Ecotype project and put some of those plants in your landscape. The really great thing about it, and what I've learned so much about, is all of these different plants bloom at different times. Not only, like, even when one plant, when they have smaller flowers or when they're just opening up in the beginning of the morning, and then they open up to a much wider area in the afternoon, different pollinators visit those same plants throughout the day, because some have smaller proboscises to reach that nectar as then the ones that pollinate them later in the day. And there's also pollinators. Jean and Abby are two wonderful women who've been monitoring the founders pots at the Hickories, and they even go in there at night with headlamps on, and they get these amazing pictures of all these night pollinators. So throughout the day, different pollinators are visiting these founder plots. And then as well, throughout the season, I heard this wonderful Southern woman speak, and she said, when we plant these plants for our pollinators, she said, it's like if you invite house guests over for a week and you only feed them on Monday. So we have to make sure when we put these pollinator plants in that we're really looking at the successional bloom times. For spring or late spring, early fall, you really want to make sure you're covering the arc of bloom times, because these pollinators need food throughout the season. And then we want to make sure that we don't fully cut them down. They are perennials, but they also use the stalks as their host plant. So it's been such an exciting project to work on. We're so excited to keep adding new species. The more support that we have, the more we're able to add new species, and even start, hopefully in the future, looking at shrubs and trees. And the more that we can help mimic natural ecosystems. When I was on the expedition, I was like profoundly influenced by the fact that we're out in these natural areas, and at a certain point, we can take in all that beauty. We can really enjoy these healthy places where we are. But as a caretaker, we want to make sure that we're putting what the environment needs back onto the landscape. So the Ecotype project provides such an easy way to participate in the great symphony that is ecology. And I hope that you all stay in touch. And now I think we can take some questions.
Perfect. Thank you. You know, one of the things that's always exciting to hear Sefra talk about this project, because I would say, you know, for me as a farmer, So much of what is happening here is in its infancy. This project has really been going for just a couple of years. And so, you know, as I said at the beginning, initially I was giving talks on what it felt like to become a farmer at the, you know, as a beginning farmer, particularly as a woman. And then I was giving talks on tomatoes, then I was giving talks on flowers. And as I've learned more and more about farming and learned more and more about agriculture, suddenly I am now on this new project, which makes me a seed farmer. I'm not just growing for the food, I'm also growing for that full circle of seed production. And I will also say that, again, just as she was speaking, one of the things that occurred to me that we may want to talk about as well is that as these crops have come onto my farm, as I have started growing native plants for seed production and at scale, and particular these local ecotypes, what is amazing about them is that they are built to exist here. They are, every gene in them is giving them the tools they need to thrive and survive here. So these plants will persist. So often we look at our gardens, and many of us, like me, trying to grow, you know, arugulas and husk cherries and all these unusual vegetables. It's so hard to grow 5,000 tomato plants a year for this community. Growing these ironweeds, Joe Pye weeds, all of that, they really are just cultivating our weeds. And they grow like weeds, and they're happy to see you, and they're happy to be here, and they really do thrive. Jean and Abby have put a tremendous amount of work into their caretaking because of the value that they have as seed crops for us. But in general, and Sefra, you might even want to queue up, if you can find that photo of the founder plots on our farm, to be able to share that out, because it really is just an extraordinarily beautiful part of our landscape. I've been a beekeeper for years, and I've seen that as central to the health of our farm, and keeping European honeybees. For anybody out there on this call who has done that, keeping European honeybees is really tough work these days. And so my philosophy has really shifted. Instead of trying to, you know, by hook or by crook, keep my honeybee hives going. I still do have honeybees, thankfully, on my farm, but instead we are trying to bring in more and more of the wild bee populations. And so these founder plots are actually sort of my backyard beehives now. My gardens are my backyard beehives. The bumblebees will overwinter oftentimes in the stalks, and they end up being wintertime bird feeders as well, because whatever seed Sefra doesn't pick off and collect is ending up feeding the wildlife all winter. So it's been a really exciting process to become a seed farmer for me. But in turning to some of your questions, and I know we have some time left here, many of you are asking about how you access these plants, but there's one question at the very beginning of the Q&A that I wanted to address right off the bat, which because it's probably the question I would have asked, which is, how much of a purist are you? That is, would you plant species from an adjacent ecoregion? What about ecoregions that aren't adjacent, as in New York State and places like that? And that's a really good question. What we have been asking folks to do in the Ecotype project is just simply to think for a moment about where their plants come from, not just their, you know, what country they're native to, but what region they are native to. And so, am I a purist? Absolutely not. Are there people in the Ecotype project who are? Absolutely yes. I think that's part of what, in the infancy of this project, is so exciting, are those debates, because we can't let, you know, the enemy be the perfect be the enemy of the good, excuse me, in all of this. We do want nursery growers simply to start being transparent about where their plants, where their seed or where their stock comes from. If you are buying a milkweed plant and you think you're doing the right thing, if that's a Tennessee milkweed, you might in fact be creating an ecological trap for those monarchs, as Sefra described. And so planting a milkweed from Westchester County, totally fine by me, as long as it is transparent in the nursery stock. You as a gardener can make that decision for yourself. But right now, that layer is hidden from the consumer, and it's hidden often from folks doing habitat restoration. We don't know where our seed comes from. And so I think just by sort of peeling that layer back and educating the public to say, you know, these are local genetics, or this was, you know, genetics collected in Massachusetts, Connecticut, allows people to make an informed decision. Do the plants that are grown across, you know, slightly in ecoregion 58 thrive here? Probably yes. But again, they are, it is, you know, to some small shade of gray, muddying those genetic waters. Other questions are about the nursery trade. Right now, because this is in its infancy, we had our first seed collection from our founder plots last year, and I should mention, Sefra, you probably want to talk about this as well, but it's important for everyone to understand the distinction between wild collecting seeds, which is the very careful and curated work of people with PhDs on the topic. We are not encouraging people to go into the woods and start having their way with our local native plants. We are saying you want to buy cultivated wild seed. And that goes to nurseries. Right now, we are working with Planter's Choice and with Gilbert's. I do know they have ecotypes from wild plants they've collected up in Earth Tones Nursery in Woodbury as well. And so there are not too many nurseries participating, but last year was our first collection. So we are keen to get some of these ecotype plants out into other nurseries in our region and around our state. Sefra, is that photo of the founder plots there?
I am. I'm pulling up the photo. I'm not quite sure why it's working, but it is beautiful to see what it looks like.
Yeah, so they are pretty. I saw it there for a split second and then it was gone. But the so Planter's Choice and these local plant sales right now is how you engage with these plants. It is our hope, if you can stay with us for another season, that NOFA will have many more nursery partners. People have asked if you can buy these plants directly from the hickories. No, not yet. Right now, I'm just learning how to grow the seed crops. Here they are. Those are some of the founder plots. That's Joe Pye weed, New York ironweed. And so those are the plots from which we are harvesting. And right now, I'm giving that seed out to nursery growers and to restoration projects. But someday perhaps I will also become a nursery grower on top of everything else, but not quite yet. Right now we're asking people to go to Planter's Choice or Gilbert's or support Aspetuck in their work selling these things. Are there specific plants that are popular in Ridgefield that are actually counterproductive, like the wrong type of milkweed? You know, probably yes. I do think that, again, I don't want to be too, if you're planting a native plant, you're already, Sefra, you might want to field this question. I mean, if you're planting native plants, you're already sort of doing a good thing. We're asking that we really try to bring this new product into the market. So until we have more, I suppose, no milkweed is a bad milkweed, but you might disagree.
I think what we're really trying to do with the Ecotype project is not reprimand anyone who's already doing the good work, but more provide a platform for education. I think it's really important, as it's so encouraging to see how many people are really getting behind these pollinator pathways and really understanding the importance of it. So what we're just trying to do is add another layer to that conversation that says, that's so great, native plants are so great, but let's take it one step farther and say, how can we be doing this in the most effective and best manner for our wild lands? And what that really is doing is just helping. There are a few nurseries around. There's the Wild Seed Project up in Maine. There are people who are doing this ecotype work, but the fact is people don't really know what that means, or don't know where to access it, or don't really know why it's important. So I think what we're trying to do is just make the conversation around conservation more understandable and more readily available, and then make these plants more available. So certainly we don't want it to take away from things that you're already doing or things that you already have on the landscape. But as we proliferate and work on building these larger habitats within our local towns in Connecticut, it would be great to have as much support as possible, understanding why we should really be looking to these seeds. So it's been really encouraging through some grants. We've gotten some very cool seed cleaning equipment, because although I liked spending countless hours with a dust mask on cleaning these seeds, now we have a much more effective way to clean the seed, which will really help amplify the amount that can be available in future seasons or seasons. I only know seed jokes.
The other thing also, which I think is worth mentioning, is that the pollination services are as essential as they are for my farm. One of the things that we have seen on these founder plot rows is the abundance of other beneficial insects, predatory insects like wasps and ladybugs and lacewings, all of whom are doing really essential agricultural work out there on my farm, protecting other crops. The more founder plots I have, I mean, it's really like an addiction. The more you have, the more you want, because you start seeing, you know, thousands of different species start to recolonize my farm. And I know that that is security, and I know that that is resilience for this landscape moving forward. And so the more I see, the more I want to plant. It's really been incredibly inspiring to sort of see the way that the strength, when you begin to sort of harness the strength of the natural world in an agrarian system, how much stronger that makes our farm. It's thrilling. And I think, as Sefra said, the other partners in this project are really struggling to find the seed. We all kind of know what the right answer is, which is cultivating local ecotypes, but there's so few places growing it in any kind of scale. And this really allows for that. So should there be a restoration project that arises in this area, we want to be able to say, even if it's 5 or 10% of the seed mix, here are some plants that have the best possible chance of persisting and thriving in whatever scale, whether it's, you know, the pot you plant on your patio, or whether it's a 20-acre, you know, solar panel pollinator installation. Yeah, sorry, jump in.
Oh yeah, just to echo that, I mean, it really is like just a cacophony of life, and it's so beautiful to be around. And in just a few days here, if you follow the Ecotype project on the CT NOFA site, we're going to be deep diving into the pollinators that are on the farm with our pollinator habitat specialist, and also with Jean and Abby's great photos that I was mentioning too. So if you want to learn more and see more about that, that is coming right up as well.
That's right, that's Thursday. Someone asked about Joe Pyeweed, Sefra, just if you want to take a moment there. What are the benefits of Joe Pyeweed? It grows on my property.
The swallowtail is a great ally of the Joe Pyeweed, and a lot of native bees as well. The Vernonia and the Joe Pyeweed have a lot of native bees. There's over 3,000 in Connecticut. For the Joe Pyeweed as well, their woody stems are great nesting sites for a lot of different insects and diversity. So just like we need snuggly places to sleep in the winter, so do a lot of insects. So there's a number of different pollinators that are specific to that, like the swallowtail, but it's also just the full architecture of that plant really helps to host a lot of species.
People are asking if we need volunteers and if COVID is interfering with the project, and those two questions essentially answer themselves. Yes, we need volunteers, and yes, COVID is interfering because we can't really have volunteers right now. We have Jean and Abby who are tending the founder plots here at the Hickories with Sefra, and we are trying to kind of keep the farm closed to the public for now. Though I think that, that inhibits volunteers in the field actually doing the weeding and harvesting and cleaning. This project, the Ecotype project, needs all the help it can get. And I cannot stress that enough in terms of volunteers to help us put together, information, folks to help us put together evenings like this, and folks to help us get the word out. I think that part of the reason Sefra was paddling down the river was to try to raise funds to keep this project going over the next couple of years. So we do need people to come in and support it, whether it's volunteering, whether it's donations. All of this work is done by a nonprofit, and the work is meant to re-enliven our landscape. And so I think, absolutely we need help. And we will need it year round. Whether it's, and I've often, in giving these talks, I recognize I'm probably not speaking to a large group of farmers out there. I'm probably speaking to homeowners. And so in the spring, part of what we are going to ask you to do is buy the plants, find the nurserymen and buy the plants. Because we as farmers have taken a real leap in giving over sections of our farmland to grow seed crops. With the belief that the consumer will be there to buy them, that the DOT will show up and say, we want to plant the medians and we need this seed. But certainly in the spring, the nursery growers are taking the same leap of faith that you will be there to buy the plants this fall and next spring. And that's going to make a huge difference, not only to this emerging market, but also to the landscape.
Yep. And I can say, just to that, this is a model and something that works. A lot of my seed saving mentors are out west in Oregon, and in places out west, using Ecotype seed for restoration is a more well-established measure. The East Coast just really needs to understand education around seed production. And the more that we all can participate in supporting this type of work, the more we can help fortify our resilience and our regenerative landscapes, and ensure that the hickories keeps on having delicious food. So, thank you so much.
People ask, Sefra, can the Pollinator Project be implemented in some way to address issues of food security in more food insecure or food desert or food apartheid locations, i.e. Urban farms or stressed ecoregions? Do you want to speak to that in terms of our partners in the city?
Yeah, absolutely. The exciting thing about this is you can plant these plants in even like a raised pot. Any sort of even smaller planting will still attract the pollinators that you need. So if you have an urban garden somewhere and then you put these right nearby it, it's doing the same work, just on a different scale. We're working with people all throughout the state. And Dina, was there someone that you wanted to mention specifically?
Well, only to say that as we looked at that map of Connecticut earlier, the Connecticut River, the riparian corridor that you were paddling, runs right from Hartford essentially to Old Saybrook, and through downtown Hartford. So absolutely, it is essential to get those plants through. Many of our urban areas are part of what fragments those landscapes. I know in specific, we have a partner in New Haven who has started a small nursery in New Hallville for the Pollinator Pathway, and is eager to get involved with this work as well.
I would say the urban areas are the most important, right? Because though, as you were saying before, those are the pollinator wastelands. And I'm sorry, that's my brother calling me. And as we basically go along those areas, those are the hardest places, just like for any of the other wildlife that we see along the river corridor, that they just have no resource, no recourse. It's like when there's no grocery stores and things in certain areas as well. So that is definitely a great focus. And there's actually tons of arable land in those areas that we could implement as Ecotype garden.
Yeah, I think in particular, as Sefra said, the ROI of seed is pretty extraordinary. In a 50-foot row, we can harvest 200,000 seeds. And so it often is not taking, a huge amount of land base to create a huge amount of seed. And restore habitats in that way. So sometimes in very small areas, you can do a tremendous amount of good work. People ask, is this taped? And I see the little recording button going in the corner. So I guess probably contact the Ridgefield Library to send this presentation on to folks who couldn't attend. And lastly, who do we contact to volunteer? Sefra or me. I would say Sefra probably first, because she's better at email than I am. Do you want to give folks the email address?
Sure, I have it. It's Sefra, so it's SEFRA at ctnofa.org. And any way that we can help facilitate getting these plants in the ground, I think it really goes to the old adage of if you plant it, they will come. So I think if we all work in this together, we can really make Fairfield County and our surrounding areas a model of how we can do this work across a lot of different sectors and through a lot of different strategic partnerships. So please. I
just want to thank Dina and Sefra for an excellent and illuminating evening. Thank you for this great presentation, and thank you all for participating. It was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you again.
Bye, everyone.